So today we thought we will look into the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita a little bit and maybe share a few verses and discuss the practical applications. So the quick background is Bhagavad Gita, as we know, stands for the Song of Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the word for God or the Supreme Being, and the expression of the teaching of Bhagavan is called as Bhagavad Gita. So the context, as many know, is the battlefield of Mahabharata, where Arjuna was confused about what is the right course of action, and therefore he asked Krishna. And Krishna broadly set out two ways in the first 4 chapters, that is 2nd through 5th. First chapter is all about Arjuna's questions because he is confused as to what is the right course of action, whether one should engage in action or whether one should go away from action because action results in conflict, and so on. So Krishna says that the nature of our true being is unaffected by any action. It is the pure awareness, and that is what we call Atman, the self. And this pure awareness or pure consciousness is untouched no matter what actions happen, whether one is engaged in action or not engaged in action. One goes through different stages of life. One goes from birth to birth. No matter what happens, it remains untouched. But what is causing this delusion is because of the identification which is wrong with the body and the mind. The body and the mind are of constant change, and by taking that as I and mine, we lose sight of our true nature, which is pure awareness. So that's the overall gist of the 2nd chapter when he sets out the broad platform that this pure being is the same regardless of what happens. He says, Dehinasmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra na mohyati. He says the embodied being goes through childhood, youth, adulthood, and old age, but all through the awareness is the same. And therefore, the pure awareness is unaffected by the passing of years, time, age, activities, anything that happens. And it cannot be affected by anything, but the delusion comes because of identification with the body and thoughts as I and mine. And then Krishna lays out two ways. One is what is generally called Karma Yoga, and the other is called as Jnana Yoga. So he says in the 3rd chapter, Lokesmin Dvivida Nishta Pura Prokta Mayanaga Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. So what it means is there are two ways to realize this truth. One is called Jnana Yoga and the other is called Karma Yoga. And the difference between the two he lays out in the next 2 chapters by saying that Karma Yoga is to act without any desire for the fruit. So when we engage in activities, whatever actions we engage in, to be able to have no particular preference for the results of the activity, to put in our best effort, but not be very caught up in the activities results, in the fruits of the results, as it were, or the fruits of the activities. So the other way to look at it is to simply accept the results, whatever they come. So no matter what happens, whether it's the weather, whether it's traffic, or whether it's big events in life, things happen, and if we are able to simply accept it without any resistance, while putting in our best effort, that's called karma yoga. And that enables us to be freed of this swings between high and low, between happiness and sadness, between excitement and depression and all the rest, because things are accepted as they are. But then he talks about in the 5th chapter what's called karma sannyas, which is the higher level of recognition, which is Jnana Yoga, that not only are the fruits of the activities happening according to a whole bunch of factors that is not in our control, but the very actor itself is falsely taken as me. So the actual doer is himself, not what we take ourselves to be. So when we recognize that not only the results of the action has to be accepted completely, but to see that the whole idea of doership itself is false, kartrutva as it's called, then the relinquishing of kartrutva is called as karma sannyasa, which is another way of calling Jnana Yoga. So Jnana Yoga is to recognize that we are not the doer, and therefore our true nature is completely unaffected by any activities, including the idea of agency itself. And activities happen. Krishna says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. He says activities happen due to 3 modes of nature. And ahankara vimudatma karta ahamiti manyate. He says only the ignorant takes the doer to be himself. And so when we take the doer to be ourselves, when we say, I am doing this, I am talking, I am eating, I am working, then the I becomes the problem, because the I then looks for credit or tries to avoid blame. When someone praises, it gets flattered. When someone insults, it feels hurt. All these movements are there. Even if one is able to be free of expecting the results and accept it, still there is the seed of misery because of identification with the I. So this is exactly the inquiry, who am I? Because what Ramana Maharshi points out is, if you inquire who am I, the kartrutva goes away. The idea of being the doer, the idea that I am the body, I am the mind, I am the senses, and I am the actor, and I am the speaker, all of these are rooted in this false notion of associating the I with temporary instruments. And therefore, that's why if you negate everything, what remains is the pure I. So to be free of doership is the same as inquiring into our own nature. So with that background, Krishna says in the 6th chapter that the whole process, again he emphasizes first that it begins by being free of the expectation of results. Because if we don't have that step clear, what happens is, and this is something Shankaracharya also brings out very clearly in his commentary, that the way to inquiry is through karma yoga, which is through freedom from expectation of results and accepting things as they are. Because if we don't have the ability to accept things as they are, then that becomes a big obstacle in even doing inquiry. We can sit alone and sit in meditation or read a book or listen to Vedanta, but if the practical ability to accept things as they are and to not be excited by anything, not be depressed by anything, but to simply receive everything as prasad, that's another way to look at it, is the idea of prasad in Vedic tradition, generally speaking, is to take everything as gift of the divine. So when we go to a temple, we get some food, we don't question what the food is, that they may give a small sweet or they may give a whole meal, Whatever is given is called prasad, and we accept it with honor. We honor it rather. So if same way, if we take everything as prasad, whatever results come, whatever financially or career-wise or relationships, children, anything that happens, if you are taking it as prasad, that is karma yoga, to put it very simply. Because many people ask this question about how can I work without having any expectation or without having any idea of the result. It is not even suggested that way. One can have a result in mind even. One can say that I am working towards this goal. But the goal is not in our control. That is the main recognition. And therefore, when we work towards something, if we put in our best effort and then whatever comes, we accept it as prasad, we accept it as divine gift, then we are free. That is karma yoga, to put it simply. And that quality is so important that without that, if we go directly into inquiry and to ask this question, who am I, or to read Upanishads and all that, it can become a bit of a simply philosophical understanding. So one good example of this in a very extreme way comes in Bhagavatam. So in Bhagavatam, as Bhagavatam is a very beautiful work of devotion. And now, to talk of devotion before we go into Bhagavatam quickly, one important point to recognize is we see that devotion is not mentioned as a path. The two ways Krishna said are Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam, Karma Yogena Yoginam. Because devotion or bhakti is common to both. Without devotion, there cannot be either Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga. Because devotion is simply accepting that there is the cosmic intelligence, the divine principle that makes everything happen. It is not to believe in some projected idea of a man sitting in the sky, as it were, but to see that there is the active principle of the universe which has got an order to it. So in the word Ishvara in Sanskrit is not the same connotation as the word God in English. The word Ishvara means, one way to look at it is the order of the universe. So the universe has a beautiful order. Every atom has an order, every cell has an order, the solar system has an order, everything has an order. That order and the intelligence, which enables even scientists to discover the laws of physics, that order is Ishvara. And that order is intelligent. It's not a insentient order. That is the place where the scientists are still struggling. They think that consciousness evolved from matter, and then now they are struggling because AI has come up and they don't know what is matter and what is consciousness. What the Vedic wisdom always says, and it is seen even practically, is consciousness is prior to matter, and matter is simply a transformation of consciousness. And quantum physics, in fact, has gone a long way in showing that also, because the quantum waves collapse into particles only upon observation. So, which is to put it in a different way, that there is no matter unless there is an observer. It is the observer who creates matter, as it were, or who manifests matter. So that's why the cosmic intelligence is at play, which is a conscious principle, and that conscious principle called cosmic intelligence makes everything happen. So we don't have to, the beauty of this is we don't have to believe in it. We can see it because we can see the intelligence operating even right now in the way we are even listening to or speaking or anything for that matter. If you go to any doctor and ask about the amount of processes involved, or let's say if or someone is trying to make a robot to talk, the amount of intelligence and the processing power required to make a robot talk is extremely complex. And it still cannot talk like even a child. So they are still struggling. So the intelligence with which we are even able to talk, to absorb language and to communicate. All of this is the cosmic intelligence, which is the supreme being. So Karma Yoga is the recognition that all the results are ordained by this intelligence. And Jnana Yoga is the recognition that the very doer is the same intelligence. Because I am not doing the words, if I really look at it carefully, the language is learned through memory, and the physical organism has to do a whole bunch of things that the mind is not even aware of in order for words to come out. So even at a very simple physical level, we can see that there is tremendous intelligence involved in acting. Even simple speaking or simple eating or anything like that, let alone complex tasks. So devotion is essential because we recognize that this cosmic intelligence is at play in every second of our life, every moment of our life. And to recognize that is to do Karma Yoga. First, if we see that this cosmic intelligence ordains things in a particular way which is far beyond what our finite mind can process, that's Karma Yoga. And then if you recognize even deeper that the I take myself to be is itself only this intelligence at the manifest level, and at the unmanifest level it's pure awareness. And to recognize that is Jnana Yoga. So going to Bhagavatam, the beautiful example there is why devotion, Vedanta without devotion or inquiry without devotion is very dangerous is demonstrated by Hiranyakashipu. There is a demon called Hiranyakashipu who his brother dies. His brother is called Hiranyaksha. He dies. And when his brother dies, his brother's wife and mother, they all cry. And Hiranyakashipu speaks Vedanta. If you read Bhagavatam, he will speak beautiful Vedanta. He will say that the body is dead, but the soul is eternal. He is not affected. This is simply the physical body. And he's speaking perfect Vedanta there. But then, when it comes to his life, he is filled with so much ego. And he wants everybody to worship him. And he thinks he is the supreme. And he makes his son to worship him. And then the story goes on beautifully that his son is very enlightened because of being graced by the Guru, Narada. And therefore he rebels against him and all the rest. So sometimes that's why one great Mahatma said that the Vedanta without devotion and Karma Yoga can be Hiranyakashipu Vedanta. We can all do that easily. We can speak Vedanta, we can understand Vedanta, we can talk Vedanta, but it's not functioning. When the rubber meets the road, as they say, we are caught up in the ego. We are caught up in our idea of attachments and expectations and all the rest. So that's why Krishna says, and this expression is used by Ramana Maharshi too, he says you have to be a pakvi, that's why. There is a word in Sanskrit called pakvi. Pakvi means one who is ripened. Yeah, that's a good word. So one has to, so the point of the point of that word is that one has to be ripened or mature in order to engage in self-inquiry. Because self-inquiry seems to be very nice philosophically, it's very clean. One can read, especially one has got a scientific bent of mind. It seems very clean, very logical. I don't have to engage in anything else. I can understand it and I can sit in meditation, but it doesn't result in the right manifestation of the awakening of the heart. It remains in the mind unless there is devotion, and devotion comes through first Karma Yoga, by recognizing that in the field of action I have no control and everything happens perfectly. This is why this accepting that everything is perfect as it is and nothing is wrong is very important. So Ramana Maharshi, in the very first teaching he gave that's the first teaching he gave, as you may know. The very first teaching Ramana ever wrote was that what is meant to happen cannot be stopped, and what's not meant to happen cannot be made to happen. நடப்பது என் தடுக்கினும் நில்லாது நடவாதது எம் முயற்சிக்கினும் நடவாது. He said, you cannot make something happen if it's not meant to happen. You cannot stop something from happening if it was not meant to happen. Therefore, remain still. So without internalizing the first two statements, we cannot remain still. So the remaining still is the Jnana Yoga. The first two sentences are the Karma Yoga. So if you, without recognizing that, if you go directly to remaining still to inquiry, it becomes, in the worst case, like Hiranyakashipu, but even otherwise, it becomes very problematic. So that's why Krishna emphasizes again and again. So in the 6th chapter, the main point Krishna emphasizes in the first few verses is focus on doing work without expecting results. This point he comes back to. He says, Anashita karma phalam karyam karma karotiyah sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragnir na chakriyah. He says, one who does work without any expectation of results, doing what is prescribed to be done, he is the real yogi, not the one who stops works prematurely. If one stops, na niragnir, niragni is a way of saying, or in fact he also says, nacha akriyaha. Akriyaha means one who stops acting. So if one stops acting and says, I am going to sit in the Himalayas, as we always say in India, but wherever it may be, if one wants to go sit in some cave or sit in some secluded place and I'm not going to engage in any activities, if he does so prematurely, he says he is not a yogi. The real yogi is one who does activities without expecting any results or by not being attached to results. Anashrita karma palam. And therefore, he goes on to say in this chapter that he emphasizes this point that one who is through the process of yoga, going through the process of yoga, for him, activities are the ways to liberate. One has to engage in activities in this manner, karma yoga, where one is not attached to the fruits, one is not expecting the fruits, and by not expecting the fruits and accepting it as it is, whatever comes about, it can be very calamitous, it can be very wonderful, it doesn't matter. If we are able to accept completely every day, every moment, and that requires great alertness. So this is where what Krishna points to is very practical, because it manifests through the day, right? So when I'm even driving in traffic, if there is suddenly something not working, we saw there was a traffic light not working, there's traffic block, and let's say we are running late, just completely accept it. This is what it is, right? Rather than getting panicked and frazzled and stressed and all that. And even big events, let's say I fall sick, let's say someone, relative, some dear one fell very badly sick, some accident, it can be from small to very big, but it's through the day, while cooking, while shopping, you see a checkout clerk who's being very slow and very taking your time. How do you respond? So there are so many moments through the day when this is put to test, and that's why alertness is so essential when we live through the day. And when we are living alertly like this, as Krishna says, that is the way of yoga. That is the way of recognizing and being free of this false identification. And then he says, one who is established in it, he can remain quiet. So he says, Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanam uchyate, yoga rudasya tasyeva shamah karanam uchyate. He says, one who is in the process, for him karma is the karanam. Karma is the activities are the way to be free. But one who is established in it, for him shama. Shama is like simply sitting. Shama is the same root as shanti. So it's simply sitting in silent meditation and being calm. That becomes very natural because the mind is not attached or active or disturbed and all the rest, because you are at peace with the world, as it were. You're at peace with your own body. There is no comparison, because comparison is the essence of suffering. Generally speaking, the whole karma yoga is, another way to put it is to be free of comparison, to have an ideal and to compare with it, whether one's own health or someone's health or results or work or time or traffic, anything. It can be small to big. To not compare but just accept things as they are, it's a great tapas. And that tapas is what Krishna refers to again in the 6th chapter. First, he says, if you do that, and then you can climb through the ladder of yoga, as it were, and be established in this silence. And for that, one has to, Krishna says, have one's own mind enable this, because one's own mind can be one's worst enemy or best friend. This we can see very practically. If the mind is engaged in complaining, in comparing, in just getting unnecessarily excited, then the mind is our worst enemy. And in fact, in this state especially, I read statistics that some 30% or more are in depression. So it's purely the mind, their own mind acting as enemy. There is nothing external. And there are children, like I know friends, Indian families do not just, we would think that it's affecting only, let's say, people who are not spiritual or who are not religious, but actually it affects even today, because the problem is today's education system is emphasizing so much on comparison, so much on peer pressure, so much on belonging to the crowd. So teenage children, you have to constantly tell them about all these things, about how the Supreme Being is the only truth and these things don't matter. Because if we don't give that grounding to them, the ground of love and devotion and the wisdom to the extent they can take it, then they get easily sucked into this peer pressure and all this. So this is a very practical thing. Krishna says that one's mind is one's worst enemy, but it can be one's best friend if you train the mind properly. If you are very alert, the best friend is the mind that is very alert. It's as simple as that. If you are very alert, and one way to say it is not let a single thought go unwatched. So when we are going through, not just sitting here, but driving or whatever, there are thoughts coming, right? Are we aware of all the thoughts that are coming? That is the first step, because there is thoughts coming about, I wish I did that, I wish I could do this, just the unconscious stream of thoughts. If we are not aware of this unconscious stream of thought, then it has great momentum, right? When the situation is hard, it has more power over us than our conscious mind even. So to bring the light of awareness into the unconscious stream of thoughts is super critical. And that's what karma yoga is at a very practical level, to see the way in which mind is going here and there through the day, the commentary in the head about people, about events, about all the rest. If you are aware of all that, very intensely alert, then we have our mind as our best friend, because that alert mind is our best friend. So that's what Krishna says. You can lift yourself with your mind, or you can pull yourself down with your mind. So it's a very practical instruction Krishna gives. And then he goes on to talk about the process of meditation itself, which we can quickly go into and then maybe just discuss or share other insights. But the important thing Krishna points out is, when one is established in this space of karma yoga, that is when one is very clear that everything happens perfectly and one is aware of one's own thoughts and thereby not getting caught in expectation and in comparison and all the rest, and being very clear and just seeing things and accepting anything that comes, and not having resistance to events, to whatever happens, not having any resistance, even inwardly. That's very important, because inwardly we tend to judge a lot. A lot of people tell that they have a very poor self-image because they are judging themselves, right? And that's actually worse than even judging others, because then you are constantly walking with a bad self-image. So to accept any thought, let's say a very so-called negative thought comes up, to control it, to suppress it is one way, but that only makes it come again. But to simply be aware of it and not do anything about it is to be free of it. So when a negative thought comes, if you see that the thought has come, and the thought has its own energy, and as long as I don't identify with the thought cannot do anything. It is simply there. It's like a bad cloud that comes and goes away, right? So to be aware of every thought and thereby no judgment within or without, and accepting everything that comes within and without, and just simply engaging in what is necessary to be done. And also there are other practical things which Ramana Maharshi also always focuses on. Is one is the highest importance of satsang, that is association with people who are interested in this, because the people, like this said, like the verse Krishna said, just as the mind pulls us down, people pull us down too, because people are nothing but minds. So when we are associating with good minds, they lift us up. When we are associating with bad minds, that is mind that is caught in, bad is again a relative word, all it means is minds that are caught in comparison, in judgment, in all these kinds of qualities, they will pull us down, and they will talk about worldly events, they'll talk about politics, they'll talk about gossip, or they will complain about others, this, that. So to engage, keep our own mind pure and to engage with pure minds, and to be able to accept whatever comes. If we are able to do that, then we can sit in meditation. And Krishna says what's important there is to have a very moderate way of life, which is also extremely important, which we tend to sometimes ignore. To eat neither too much nor too little, to sleep neither too much nor too little, to be very regulated in one's activities in general, to have brahmacharya, to have brahmacharya is basically either celibacy or only having marital conjugal life, not essentially essentially live a very regulated, disciplined life. Because if you are not disciplined and regulated, then we dissipate energy in so many ways. And food is a very simple example. That's why Ramana Maharshi says Mida Satvika Aharam. In that one important regulation is like moderate sattvic food. It's so important. Sattvic food is basically foods that are very conducive to keep the mind calm. So, I mean, it can be, one has to experiment for oneself, but generally speaking, fruits and vegetables and milk and these kinds of foods are very good for keeping the mind calm. But so Krishna says those two, that keep the mind peaceful by engaging in moderation in food, neither too little nor too much, moderation in sleep, moderation in all activities, be in a clean place, outwardly also. And then he gives some specific instructions on, one important instruction that he gives, which is in this chapter, is to sit erect, which is very important, because Brahma Sutra also says that everywhere it's said, in Buddha's posture itself is so erect, if you see. So because the science behind it is that our spinal column is the conduit for energy. And so if you are hunched or not sitting in the right posture, then it doesn't flow. So Brahma Sutra, which is the highest teaching on pure knowledge, takes the point to emphasize sit erectly. It says asanat sambhava. It says the right posture makes realization happen. So that's what Krishna also says, sit erectly so that your head and your neck and your whole body is in straight line, and eat moderately, sleep moderately, and be in a calm place, pure place, clean place, and engage in what is called Dhyana, so which is meditation. So, but he first gives the ground, which is Karma Yoga, so that one is clear, and then from that ground of total acceptance, one can have better meditation. Because if one is not accepting things in the realm of activities, then meditation becomes a very disturbed activity at best. So these are the two main points. Then there are some questions Arjuna asks, which are, one important question he asks, which is important to point out, is he asks, the mind is so restless though. So we say all this, but the mind is restless. And Krishna says, yes, it is restless, but you have to, he says two things, Vairagya and Abhyasa. Vairagya means detachment, and Abhyasa means practice. And detachment, there is two ways to bring about detachment. One is, of course, what is emphasized in Buddhism a lot too, which is seeing the impermanence of everything. If you see the impermanence, that brings about detachment. We see that the body is impermanent, this house, everything is impermanent, and therefore there is no point in getting too attached to it. But it's a very negative detachment, which has, it's good in its own way, but it has the potential for falling into temptation, because you're not going toward anything, you are just negating something. The other way, which is what Bhagavatam points to, which is to have love for God, because when you have love, then detachment for the world comes automatically. The more we love God, the more we detach from the world. So if you love Krishna, if you love Bhagavan, then that love is so powerful that I'm not so much interested in worldly events, I'm not interested in who's winning the election, or I'm not interested in any of these events, because my heart is devoted to love. And the best way to love is through engaging with, and this is where the beauty of the notion of avatars come, which is very unique and essential, because avatar, the word became very famous because of the movie. The literal word is descent. So it is the descent of the Supreme Being into this world, and Krishna's descent especially is so conducive for that, because Krishna has so many names and so many pastimes that one can talk about these beautiful pastimes and discuss. Bhagavatam is only dedicated to that entirely, is that we can simply discuss Krishna's pastimes and thereby have this love for the sweetness for Krishna's pastimes. It can be for any divine form. Basically, the object of love has to be pure. It cannot be, that's why the romantic love doesn't work, because there the other person also wants something. So it's a love which is based on mutual desiring. But if the love is toward the pure embodiment of the divine, then that love brings about vairagya, naturally, detachment. So that's why Krishna says, have detachment and practice. And detachment, the best way to have detachment is through this divine love. After that, there are some questions about the possibility of someone not reaching the goal in this birth and what happens and so on. That's almost like the second part of 6th chapter. It's applicable to all yogas. It's not just the content of 6th chapter, that there is this idea that things continue birth from birth. So even if one doesn't go all the way, one will resume where one left off in the next birth. So it's important to focus whatever we can do in this birth, but with the full confidence that we will recognize and realize the truth. It's both instantaneous and it's lifelong, right? Because the actual recognition is that it is all there is. There is nothing other than Him. All there is the cosmic intelligence which makes everything happen. So there is nobody to realize. That's why Ramana Maharshi has said many times that the self is always realized. There's who is there to realize? It's a done deal, right? It's because the pure awareness is always pure. It doesn't need to realize anything. So the only work involved here is the removal of the false identification. And the false identification removal is only through alertness. So we cannot say that it is something that is like an event in time. There are some specific cases, Ramana Maharshi being a very unique example, where he had this death experience, and then the idea of I and mine completely went away once and for all. But in Bhagavatam, for example, we see that even great beings like Dhruva, who had the vision of Bhagavan, later had problems. So it is not that it comes and it's all over. The constant vigilance and alertness is essential for almost all, as long as we have a body. And therefore, that's why Krishna says you have to be devoted. And the easiest way in the 12th chapter, Krishna says, is be completely devoted to this Supreme Being, devoted to me. So Krishna says, Krishna is the embodiment of this pure Supreme Being. If you are completely devoted to Bhagavan every moment and remain in bhakti, then that is all matters. So Bhagavatam, that's why it says, remain always in this stream of love. Don't focus on moksha. So Bhagavatam, the second verse, it's the first verse, lays out the whole truth. The complete truth is summarized in the first verse, Janma Dasyeta. And the second verse, it says, this work is that which takes you beyond the goal of liberation. Because liberation is also only for the ego. It's as long as we take ourselves to be an individual, that I want liberation, I want enlightenment, I want self-realization, all that. But Bhagavatam, that's why it points out, and Krishna says in the Gita, that all there is only the Supreme Being. So be devoted to Him and see everything through the eyes of love, divine love. And then you are always realized. So that's the essence of Bhagavad Gita in general, but that's the essence of Vairagya in particular. To have Vairagya or detachment is through divine love. So that's the answer to Arjuna's question on how to bring the mind under control by divine love and Vairagya.